I had a question on Manonasa. And I was wondering if you could define Manonasa, and if you could say if you have, quote unquote, reached Manonasa.
Yeah. Manonasa. So Manonasa is obviously, it's a Sanskrit word. It's obviously a technical term. It means destruction of the mind. So it's a pretty full-on term. It doesn't mean partial destruction of the mind. It doesn't mean lessening of the mind. It means destruction of the mind. Nasa means destruction, and mana, it comes from manas, meaning mind. And it's synonymous with moksha, liberation. The synonyms. You'll find in the scriptures, in the Vedic scriptures, and the Upanishads, many different words for the same concepts. So if you see Manonasa is a negating term. It talks about something, the mind, and then it talks about its destruction. So it's the absence of something. It's the destruction of something, you see. Whereas other terms are more positive. So it's like self-realization, for example, is not talking about destruction of the self. It's talking about realization of the self, you see. So that's showing it in the affirmative, and this is showing it in the negative, Manonasa. Can anyone think of any other terms for liberation that employ the negative? Can anyone just, I won't spend too long on this, but can anyone think of any other?
Nirvana.
Nirvana, very good. Yes, Demetrius, thank you. Nirvana. So Manonasa is the same as nirvana. Nir is the negating prefix, like in nirvikalpa samadhi, or nir, meaning negating. And vana refers to a fire or a flame. It means no flame, no fire. So some people could sometimes translate it as extinguishment, because you're extinguishing the flame of a candle. This flame, nirvana, is obviously associated to us nowadays with Buddhism. But the word nirvana is used in the Upanishads. It's used in the Bhagavad Gita as a synonym for liberation. And it's used by these texts prior to Buddhism existing. So it's a very Vedic term. And vana refers to egotism. It refers to ignorance. So nirvana is the removal of the flame of egotism. Why is egotism thought of as being a flame? Why? Because it's contagious. It catches fire. Everything catches fire with it. Everything. It taints everything. Ignorance is like a drop of ink that you pipette one small drop of ink into a vast beaker of clear water, and the whole beaker of water is now tainted with this ink. Just with one drop of ink. This is the nature of ignorance. This is the nature of egotism. It infests and it spreads and multiplies. This is the nature of Maya. Proliferates. So the ego is said to be a blaze, a light, a flame. Everything catches fire with it. It taints everything. So Manonasa literally means removal of the mind. But what does the word mind mean here? Because don't sages have minds? Didn't we hear Ramana speak? Did he not think? Yes and no. So what do we mean by mind? Mind means ignorance. So Manonasa means removal of ignorance. Because liberation is defined as removal of ignorance. Just as we've got different words for liberation in the scriptures, jnana, nirvana, self-realization, atma sakshakara. You've got all these different words that mean vidya means knowledge. Anubhuti means experience or Aparokshanabhuti means direct experience. So you've got all these different words for liberation. You've also got all these different words for ignorance. The mind is often used as a synonym for ignorance. The ego, ahankara, it means ignorance. Avidya, ajnana, this all means ignorance. So mananasa means removal of ignorance. Now, it's confusing. There are actually two forms of mananasa talked about in the scriptures. Two forms, because there are two forms of liberation that are broadly talked about in the Advaita scriptures. They're broad. I don't want to. I mean, I don't know if I'm becoming too technical for this group. So, you know, if people don't know what these terms mean, let me know. Obviously, ask a question, we'll sort it out. But you've got the jiva mukti and then the vidya mukti. The jiva mukti or the jivan mukti is, well, let me define it this way. When ignorance goes, what happens after ignorance is gone? You read in one scripture, it says one thing. You read in another scripture, it says another thing. And you read in the third scripture, it says something else. And so on. There are lots of different arguments and theories. Bhagavan Ramana has told us, liberation is the same for everyone. There's only one liberation, but from the point of view of the world, meaning from the point of view of ignorance, there appears to be different types of sages. Some will live very active lives. Some will sit in a cave and do nothing. Some will look after their bodies and appear to be very well integrated into society. Others will neglect themselves. Some will have great things happen to them and have special powers. Others will not. Others will, you know, disaster will appear to happen to them, you know. Disastrous things will appear to happen to them. But from the point of view of liberation, it doesn't matter. It's all good. The two broad types, when people talk mananasa, they tend to talk about with objects and without objects. A bit like savikalpa and nirvikalpa samadhi. You've got those two types of mananasa. When the ignorance goes, sometimes the world disappears with it. And sometimes the world doesn't disappear. There's still an impression of the world as it arises. These are two forms of mananasa. It doesn't make a difference if there's true mananasa there. It doesn't make a difference. Remember the jiva, you asked me if I attained mananasa, the jiva can never attain mananasa. Mananasa is the absence of the jiva. So it is, mananasa is our true nature. It's very difficult. So the way I say about liberation, to keep it practical, is if the suffering's there. If the suffering is still there, then we can say ignorance is still there. If the suffering is gone, then we say that's liberation. But the thing about these terms is that all these terms, all these concepts are themselves Maya. They're just there as guides. We shouldn't get too caught up in it. The main purpose of all these teachings is to encourage us to do the practice. That's it. So if these teachings and these terms are helpful for you to do the practice of self-inquiry, or get you nearer to self-inquiry, to quiet your mind, calm you down, to make you happier, freer, then they're working. If it's confusing you and you're reading books and trying to figure out all the analysis and trying to figure out what these terms mean, it can be a hindrance. The best way to really find out what these words mean is not by listening to someone like me talk about the theory, but to find out for yourself. So never forget that.